Hollywood has finally delivered a verdict that Buckingham Palace itself never publicly dared to pronounce. Not from British tabloids, not from royal gossip columns, not from anonymous palace whispers hidden behind heavy curtains and polished corridors. This time, the judgment came from the center of the American entertainment empire itself, and the words now echoing across both sides of the Atlantic may become impossible for Meghan Markle to escape. Dictator in high heels. That was the phrase attached to the Duchess of Sussex, in a report that has shaken not only royal watchers, but executives, publicists, and insiders throughout Hollywood. For years, criticism surrounding Meghan had been dismissed by supporters as jealousy, racism, or resistance from an old institution unwilling to accept change. Every accusation was framed as another attack from a hostile establishment desperate to protect tradition. But suddenly, the voices were no longer coming from palace courtiers in London. They were coming from California. They were coming from Americans. And according to multiple accounts, they were coming from people who once worked directly inside the carefully guarded world of Montecito. That is what makes this moment different, because Hollywood is not Buckingham Palace. Hollywood protects money, influence, branding, and reputation above all else. It is an industry built on image management. Careers survive scandals there every day. Public reinventions are practically a business model. But when one of the most influential trade publications in the entertainment world publishes claims describing a culture of fear surrounding a celebrity figure, the damage spreads differently, quietly, permanently. According to the report, former staff members described an atmosphere defined by tension, emotional exhaustion, and intimidation. Some allegedly left their positions psychologically drained. Others reportedly described an environment where employees felt constantly anxious, terrified of making mistakes, or emotionally diminished behind closed doors. The allegations painted not the picture of a modern humanitarian figure, but of a leader whose management style created fear rather than loyalty. And perhaps most devastating of all, these were not accusations emerging from hostile royal insiders in Britain. These were American professionals operating far outside the walls of Kensington Palace. That single detail shattered one of the strongest defenses Meghan and Harry had relied upon for years, because until now, every criticism could be redirected toward the monarchy itself. The palace was cold. The institution was outdated. The courtiers were threatened by a strong American woman unwilling to obey ancient rules. That narrative became the shield protecting the Sussex brand from almost every scandal that followed their royal departure. But a shield only works when the attacks come from the same direction. Now the criticism is arriving from Hollywood itself. And Hollywood rarely turns against its own, unless something deeper is happening behind the scenes. The timing could hardly be worse. Public fascination surrounding Harry and Meghan has already shifted dramatically over recent years. What once looked like the glamorous reinvention of a modern royal couple increasingly appears, at least to critics, like an unstable collision between celebrity culture and monarchy. Multi-million-dollar deals promised influence, inspiration, and cultural power. Instead, many projects struggled to maintain momentum. Interviews intended to generate sympathy often created backlash. Public appearances designed to project warmth instead fueled endless debate. Yet even through all of that, Meghan's public image remained protected by a carefully maintained narrative of victimhood and resilience. Until now. Because this report did not emerge from the British press ecosystem, Meghan's supporters have spent years attacking. It emerged from an American publication deeply embedded within the entertainment establishment itself. That changes the psychology of the story completely. Suddenly, critics are no longer dismissed as royal traditionalists. The conversation has moved into mainstream American media territory, where reputation can collapse with astonishing speed once a negative perception begins circulating among insiders. And that is precisely why palace observers reportedly view this moment as a turning point. For years, Buckingham Palace maintained near-total silence regarding allegations connected to Meghan's treatment of staff during her time as a working royal. Official investigations were sealed away from public view. Reports vanished behind institutional walls. Senior royals refused public confrontation, believing perhaps that silence protected the monarchy better than open warfare. But according to royal commentators, there are growing voices inside establishment circles arguing that silence may no longer be enough, because the accusations are no longer isolated incidents. They are becoming a pattern stretching from Kensington Palace to Montecito, from royal aides to Hollywood employees, from whispered palace rumors to international headlines. And once patterns form in public consciousness, they become extraordinarily difficult to erase. especially when fear becomes the defining theme repeated by former staff. Perhaps the most dangerous development for the Sussex brand is not even the allegations themselves. Public figures survive allegations constantly. What destroys reputations is something far more serious: credibility erosion. The slow moment when audiences stop giving the benefit of the doubt, when every denial sounds rehearsed, when every public appearance feels strategic, when sympathy begins turning into exhaustion. That is the stage many commentators now believe Meghan has entered. Not scandal, not controversy, but reputational fatigue. And inside palace circles, there are increasing suggestions that Prince William views the situation not merely as embarrassing family drama, but as a long-term institutional threat to the monarchy itself. Because according to persistent reports surrounding royal insiders, there may already exist a sealed document hidden within palace walls that could transform this Hollywood controversy into something even more explosive. A report the public has never fully seen. A report connected to allegations from years earlier. A report some believe could permanently redefine how the world views the rise and fall of the Duchess of Sussex. For years, there was one defense that appeared almost untouchable whenever criticism surrounded Meghan Markle. No matter how severe the allegations became, no matter how many stories emerged from palace insiders or former staff, the response followed the same pattern. The problem was not Meghan. The problem was the institution. The monarchy was outdated. The palace was hostile. The establishment could not tolerate a modern American woman entering one of the oldest royal systems on earth. That narrative became the foundation of the Sussex story after their departure from royal life. And for a long time, it worked. Many people around the world sympathized deeply with Harry and Meghan. They saw a couple trapped inside a rigid machine built on hierarchy, silence, and centuries of protocol. Meghan especially was presented as someone targeted unfairly by traditional forces resistant to change. Every conflict inside palace walls became evidence supporting that interpretation. Every criticism reinforced the image of a woman under attack by powerful institutions protecting themselves. But institutions are not destroyed by accusation alone. They are damaged when patterns begin repeating in entirely different environments. And that is where the current situation becomes profoundly dangerous for the Sussex brand. Because Buckingham Palace and Montecito have almost nothing in common. Different countries, different cultures, different industries, different structures of power. Yet according to the latest reports emerging from Hollywood circles, some former employees are allegedly describing remarkably similar experiences. That is the detail critics now emphasize most heavily. Not one complaint. Not one difficult working relationship. But repetition. What terrifies powerful institutions more than scandal is pattern recognition. Once separate incidents begin forming a consistent narrative, public perception hardens quickly. People stop evaluating accusations individually. Instead, they begin connecting them into a larger story about character itself. And according to royal commentators, that transformation may already be happening. The Montecito image once projected warmth, freedom, independence, and reinvention. It was supposed to represent escape from royal oppression, California sunshine replacing palace rigidity, creative freedom replacing institutional control, compassion replacing hierarchy. The Sussexes position themselves not only as survivors of monarchy, but as architects of a more humane public identity built around empathy, mental health advocacy, and modern leadership. But critics now argue that the image behind closed doors may have looked very different. Reports describing exhausted staff, emotional strain, and rapid employee turnover have reignited questions that many believed the Sussexes had already escaped years ago. Why do so many employees reportedly leave? Why do similar claims continue appearing across entirely separate professional environments? Why do accounts from palace aides in Britain now appear eerily echoed by workers in California? These questions are becoming increasingly difficult for supporters to dismiss as coincidence, especially because the current allegations no longer involve royal courtiers shaped by palace tradition. The individuals reportedly speaking now are Americans working within the entertainment and media ecosystem Meghan herself chose after leaving royal life behind. That distinction changes everything psychologically. The old narrative depended heavily on the idea that Meghan was misunderstood by an ancient British institution. But if similar accusations emerge in the very environment she selected for freedom and reinvention, then critics argue the explanation can no longer rest entirely on palace culture or institutional bias. Suddenly the focus shifts away from the system and toward the individual. And that shift may be the single most dangerous development the Sussex brand has faced since leaving Britain. Because celebrity culture survives controversy remarkably well. Hollywood forgives almost anything when success remains profitable. But what it struggles to tolerate is instability behind the scenes. Executives, producers, agents, and corporate partners value predictability above emotion. Once a public figure develops a reputation for chaos, fear, or internal dysfunction, professional relationships quietly begin changing long before headlines confirm it publicly. That is why commentators increasingly describe Meghan not simply as controversial, but as a growing reputational risk. The language itself has changed. At first, critics called her difficult, then divisive. Now, some commentators are using terms like toxic, destabilizing, or damaging to institutional credibility. These are not ordinary celebrity insults anymore. They are words associated with corporate liability and long-term brand erosion. And according to some royal insiders, this is precisely the stage Prince William feared years ago. Unlike Harry, William was raised entirely inside the logic of monarchy. He understands something fundamental about royal survival. Public trust matters more than personal emotion. The crown can survive scandal. It can survive embarrassment. It can even survive betrayal. But it struggles to survive prolonged instability surrounding its public image. This is why palace silence over earlier bullying allegations has become such a controversial subject again. Because many now believe the monarchy protected Meghan from public destruction once already. According to persistent reports within royal commentary circles, internal concerns about staff treatment during Meghan's time at Kensington Palace were considered serious enough to trigger formal complaints years ago. Yet, the details were never publicly released. Investigations reportedly disappeared behind palace confidentiality, legal caution, and institutional restraint. At the time, critics accused the palace of hiding the truth, while supporters claimed the allegations themselves were malicious smears. Now, after Hollywood entered the conversation, that buried history suddenly feels much more significant, especially because commentators increasingly suggest there is a growing divide inside royal circles regarding how much longer silence should continue. Some reportedly believe the monarchy has already absorbed enough reputational damage, protecting Harry and Meghan from deeper scrutiny. Others fear that releasing internal findings would escalate an already toxic public conflict permanently. But one thing appears increasingly clear from the commentary surrounding these reports. Patience inside establishment circles may be running out, because the issue is no longer viewed merely as family tension. It is becoming framed as institutional survival, and according to growing speculation surrounding palace insiders, Prince William may already possess the one thing capable of transforming suspicion into irreversible public judgment: a sealed report, a document allegedly hidden from public view since the early years of Meghan's royal life. A file some believe could destroy forever the final remnants of the Sussex victim narrative. Deep behind palace walls, beyond the reach of cameras, headlines, and carefully staged public appearances, there is reportedly a document the public was never meant to see. A file spoken about in royal circles almost like a state secret, locked away, sealed, protected by silence, lawyers, and institutional caution. Yet according to growing speculation surrounding palace insiders, that hidden report may now sit at the center of one of the most dangerous crises facing the modern monarchy. Because this is no longer simply about bad headlines. It is about whether Buckingham Palace made a catastrophic mistake by choosing silence over exposure. The allegations surrounding Meghan Markle's treatment of staff during her time as a working royal are not new. Complaints reportedly surfaced years ago, long before Montecito, long before Hollywood contracts, and long before the Sussex brand transformed into a global media machine. At the time, palace officials were said to be deeply concerned about internal tensions surrounding Kensington Palace operations. Reports emerged describing distressed employees, emotional strain, and staff members allegedly pushed beyond their limits behind closed doors. Then suddenly, almost everything disappeared from public view. The monarchy closed ranks. Investigations became confidential. Discussion stopped. And the palace entered its preferred state during crisis: silence. That silence protected the institution temporarily, but according to critics, it may also have protected the Sussex narrative in ways the monarchy never anticipated. Because once the palace refused public confrontation, Harry and Meghan gained enormous freedom to shape the story themselves. The absence of official contradiction allowed them to position criticism as palace hostility rather than legitimate concern. And for a while, that strategy succeeded brilliantly. The monarchy looked cold, Harry and Meghan looked persecuted. The institution appeared defensive and outdated, while the Sussexes presented themselves as modern, emotionally honest, and liberated from royal cruelty. But history inside royal systems moves slowly. The crown survives because it understands patience better than almost any institution on earth. Monarchies do not react emotionally. They endure. They absorb damage quietly while waiting for public opinion to evolve naturally over time. That is why some royal observers now believe Prince William has approached the situation very differently from his younger brother. Harry views conflict personally. William reportedly views it institutionally. And according to persistent commentary surrounding palace dynamics, that distinction may explain why the future king has become increasingly central to conversations about the sealed bullying report. Because insiders suggest William no longer sees the Sussex controversy merely as painful family drama. He allegedly sees it as a long-term threat to the credibility and stability of the monarchy itself. From that perspective, protecting the institution becomes more important than protecting relationships. And perhaps nowhere is that contrast more visible than in the growing divide between the brothers. One embraced celebrity culture, public interviews, and emotional disclosure. The other embraced restraint, continuity, and silence. One built a brand around personal grievance. The other reportedly focused on preserving institutional authority. This is why commentators increasingly describe William not as emotional but strategic. According to several royal analysts, there are now figures within establishment circles urging King Charles to reconsider the monarchy's silence surrounding the original staff complaints. Their argument is simple and brutal. If allegations emerging from Hollywood now mirror concerns reportedly raised years earlier inside Kensington Palace, then continued secrecy no longer protects the monarchy. Instead, it risks making the institution appear weak, evasive, or even complicit in concealing damaging behavior. And that changes the political atmosphere entirely. Because titles within the royal system are not supposed to function merely as celebrity branding tools, they are symbols tied historically to duty, service, and institutional loyalty. Critics increasingly argue that if a titled royal becomes associated publicly with allegations of intimidation, dysfunction, or reputational chaos, pressure inevitably grows for the monarchy to respond, especially when public confidence is involved. That is why discussions surrounding the Duchess of Sussex title have intensified dramatically in recent months. Commentators, royal traditionalists, and some political voices now openly question whether royal honors should remain attached to figures viewed by critics as actively damaging the crown's image abroad. And according to some reports, William is among those believed to favor a firmer institutional response. Not emotional revenge, not public warfare, but separation. A clear distinction between the future of the monarchy and the chaos increasingly surrounding the Sussex orbit. Because from the perspective of royal survival, perception matters more than sentiment. The monarchy cannot afford endless instability attached to its public identity. Every scandal connected to titled royals eventually reflects back upon the institution itself. Every controversy erodes symbolic authority little by little, and royal systems survive only as long as public respect survives with them. That reality reportedly weighs heavily inside palace circles now, especially as Hollywood criticism continues amplifying stories Buckingham Palace once hoped would quietly disappear forever. And perhaps most dangerous of all for Harry and Meghan is the growing impression that time may no longer be working in their favor. The sympathy wave that once protected them appears weaker, public fatigue appears stronger, critics sound more confident. Supporters increasingly struggle to dismiss every accusation as coordinated palace cruelty when similar narratives emerge independently across multiple environments. Which brings attention back again to the sealed report. The file that allegedly documents staff concerns from the earliest period of Meghan's royal life. The document critics believe could validate years of whispered allegations. The report many believe Prince William once preserved not out of vengeance, but out of institutional necessity. Because if public pressure surrounding the Sussexes continues intensifying, the monarchy may eventually face a decision it has spent years desperately avoiding. Reveal the truth and ignite a global firestorm. Or remain silent and risk allowing suspicion, speculation, and reputational erosion to consume the crown itself. And according to royal commentators, signs are already emerging that the palace may be preparing for something far more symbolic than public confrontation. Because on Prince Harry's milestone birthday, the royal family delivered a message so cold, so calculated, and so unmistakably deliberate that royal watchers around the world immediately understood its meaning. Harry was acknowledged. But Meghan was erased. Royal families rarely speak directly during moments of crisis. They do not explain themselves emotionally. They do not rush into public arguments. Instead, they communicate through symbols, gestures, timing, and silence. A photograph, a balcony position, a missing invitation, a carefully chosen sentence. Within monarchy, these details matter because institutions built across centuries understand that symbolism often speaks louder than confrontation. And that is precisely why Prince Harry's 40th birthday triggered such intense discussion among royal observers. At first glance, the message released by the royal family appeared simple, polite, controlled, a routine acknowledgement marking a milestone birthday. Nothing dramatic, nothing openly hostile. Yet, within hours, attention shifted away from the birthday itself and towards something far more revealing: the photograph. Because in the image shared publicly by the royal household, Meghan Markle was gone, carefully removed, deliberately excluded. And according to many commentators, the omission carried a message far more powerful than any official statement could have achieved. For years, critics accused Buckingham Palace of being cold toward Harry and Meghan. The Sussexes themselves repeatedly portrayed the institution as emotionally distant and unwilling to reconcile. But the birthday message complicated that narrative in a fascinating way. Harry was acknowledged publicly by the family he once accused of betrayal. The palace extended recognition despite years of interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and accusations aimed directly at the monarchy. Yet Meghan was absent from the gesture entirely. Not attacked, not mentioned. Simply erased from the visual frame. Inside royal systems, that distinction matters enormously, because monarchy functions through controlled diplomacy. Open hostility creates instability. Symbolic distancing creates clarity without chaos. By removing Meghan from the image while still acknowledging Harry's birthday, the palace appeared to many observers to be sending an unmistakable signal. The door may not be entirely closed to Harry himself, but Meghan is increasingly viewed as separate from the future of the institution. This interpretation spread rapidly through royal commentary circles. Some described the photograph as a warning. Others viewed it as quiet exile. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing: the image was not accidental. Nothing in royal communication is accidental, especially not during a moment watched globally by media organizations, political observers, and palace insiders alike. What made the moment even more striking was the contrast between the restrained tone of the palace and the chaos surrounding the Sussex reputation elsewhere. While Hollywood discussions focused on allegations of fear, bullying, and internal dysfunction, Buckingham Palace responded with absolute calm. No public arguments, no emotional retaliation, only a measured acknowledgement stripped down to its barest form. Harry remained visible. Meghan did not. And that visual separation may become one of the most significant, symbolic moments in the ongoing royal conflict. Because institutions survive partly through defining boundaries, the monarchy cannot publicly control what Harry and Meghan say in California. It cannot prevent interviews, documentaries, or media campaigns. But it can control one thing completely: association, who stands inside the royal image, and who no longer does. For many royal observers, the birthday photograph represented precisely that process unfolding in real time. A separation, not necessarily legal, not formally announced, but psychologically and institutionally unmistakable. This matters because public perception surrounding Meghan appears increasingly unstable on both sides of the Atlantic. The Hollywood allegations intensified existing criticism. Questions surrounding staff treatment continue resurfacing. Public fatigue towards Sussex controversies appears to be growing, and according to some commentators, palace strategists may now believe the safest path forward is gradual distancing rather than dramatic confrontation. In other words, containment. Allow Harry limited symbolic connection to the royal family, while quietly isolating the institution from Meghan's controversies altogether. And from the perspective of royal survival, that strategy makes sense. The monarchy has survived for centuries not because it reacts emotionally, but because it adapts slowly while preserving continuity. Every public move is calculated through the lens of long-term stability. Personal feelings matter far less than institutional optics. If palace officials increasingly believe Meghan has become a reputational liability attached to the crown, then symbolic separation becomes almost inevitable, especially with Prince William preparing eventually to inherit the throne. Because unlike Harry, William's entire public identity revolves around continuity, service, and controlled stability. The future king cannot afford prolonged association with endless celebrity conflict, Hollywood scandal cycles, or accusations of internal toxicity surrounding royal-linked figures abroad. From the perspective of the institution, the future monarchy must look disciplined, calm, and trustworthy. Not chaotic, not commercialized, and certainly not trapped inside perpetual media warfare. This is why the contrast between the Wales family and the Sussexes has become so central to royal commentary. William and Catherine increasingly represent institutional discipline and continuity. Harry and Meghan increasingly represent disruption, grievance, and celebrity exposure. Whether fair or unfair, that contrast now dominates public perception surrounding the future of the monarchy. And the birthday photograph crystallized that divide in a single image. One brother remained connected cautiously to the institution. The wife beside him did not. Yet perhaps the most damaging consequence for Meghan is not the symbolism itself, but what the symbolism suggests about private palace thinking. Royal families do not publicly distance themselves without reason. They act slowly, carefully, sometimes almost painfully cautiously, which means that if visible separation is now appearing openly within official royal communication, many observers believe far more serious conversations may already be happening privately behind palace walls, especially as pressure reportedly grows around titles, public reputation, and the long-term protection of the crown. Because according to several commentators, the concern inside establishment circles is no longer simply embarrassment. It is contamination. The fear that continued association between the monarchy and the Sussex controversies could gradually erode the dignity and authority the institution depends upon for survival. And while Buckingham Palace was signaling that fear through silence and symbolism, another world was beginning to send signals of its own. Hollywood. The very industry Harry and Meghan once believed would secure their future. Because behind closed executive offices and entertainment power circles, there were already growing whispers that the Sussex brand itself might be collapsing into something far more dangerous than controversy, a liability nobody wanted attached to their business anymore. In monarchy, perception is not secondary to survival. Perception is survival. Crowns do not endure for centuries through military power alone. They survive because people continue believing in the symbolic authority surrounding them. The image of dignity matters. Stability matters. Continuity matters. Once public trust begins eroding, even slowly, institutions built over generations can weaken from within. And according to a growing number of commentators, Meghan Markle has now become something far more dangerous to the monarchy than controversial. She has become a reputational liability. That phrase may sound cold, but inside royal and corporate systems, it carries enormous meaning. A liability is not merely someone disliked by critics. A liability is someone whose continued association creates risk. Risk to partnerships, risk to public confidence, risk to institutional credibility, risk to long-term stability, and increasingly, commentators on both sides of the Atlantic are beginning to frame Meghan in precisely those terms. Not as a misunderstood outsider, not as a rebellious reformer, but as a source of ongoing reputational damage attached to every institution she touches. This shift matters because the Sussex strategy after leaving royal life depended entirely on influence. Hollywood contracts, streaming platforms, public speaking, brand partnerships, media visibility. Their future was designed around public image, around emotional connection, around the belief that audiences would continue viewing Harry and Meghan as inspirational figures challenging an outdated establishment. For a brief period, that strategy appeared unstoppable. Major deals were announced with enormous fanfare. Powerful agencies aligned themselves with the Sussex brand. Media executives anticipated global fascination. The couple seemed positioned to become a modern hybrid of royalty, celebrity, activism, and entertainment influence unlike anything the monarchy had seen before. But influence requires consistency. And consistency is exactly what critics argue has collapsed. Projects arrived slowly. Public narratives shifted repeatedly. Sympathy gradually transformed into fatigue among portions of the audience. Interviews intended to strengthen public support instead intensified polarization. Corporate partners reportedly became increasingly cautious. And now, with Hollywood trade publications openly amplifying allegations surrounding workplace culture, the atmosphere surrounding the Sussex brand appears more unstable than ever. Because Hollywood tolerates scandal far more easily than uncertainty. Executives understand controversy. In fact, controversy can sometimes increase visibility and profit. But what business leaders fear deeply is unpredictability attached to high-value partnerships. Once an individual begins generating constant reputational turbulence, every future project becomes harder to manage. Every collaboration becomes riskier. Every headline threatens to overshadow the product itself. That is why some commentators now believe the entertainment industry's attitude toward Harry and Meghan has fundamentally changed. At first, they were viewed as exciting, then valuable, then controversial. Now, increasingly, they are described as exhausting, and exhaustion is lethal inside celebrity culture. Because public attention eventually moves elsewhere, audiences lose emotional investment, media fascination cools. What once felt groundbreaking begins feeling repetitive. The same narratives repeat endlessly until even supporters stop responding with enthusiasm. That appears to be the danger surrounding the Sussex image now. Not explosive collapse. Slow erosion. The kind that happens gradually while public trust weakens piece by piece. And from the perspective of Buckingham Palace, that erosion creates a terrifying possibility. Every scandal surrounding Harry and Meghan inevitably drifts back toward the monarchy itself because their royal titles remain attached to their public identities. No matter how independent they claim to be, the words Duke and Duchess continue linking their actions to the crown. This is precisely why pressure surrounding titles has intensified so dramatically. Critics increasingly argue that royal honors are meant to symbolize service, discipline, and institutional responsibility. They were never designed to function as celebrity branding tools inside Hollywood culture. Yet, according to many royal traditionalists, that is exactly what has happened. The monarchy's symbolic authority has become intertwined with commercial deals, lifestyle branding, public grievances, podcasts, documentaries, and endless cycles of celebrity controversy. For some observers, the contrast has become almost surreal. On one side stands an institution more than 1,000 years old, built on continuity, restraint, and ceremonial authority. On the other stands a California-based media identity increasingly associated with personal branding, public conflict, luxury products, and influencer-style image management. And according to critics, the collision between those worlds is damaging the dignity of the monarchy itself. That concern appears especially strong regarding Prince William and the future direction of the crown. Royal commentators increasingly suggest the Prince of Wales wants a smaller, more disciplined monarchy focused entirely on duty and institutional trust. From that perspective, prolonged association with celebrity-driven controversy becomes unsustainable long-term, especially if accusations surrounding workplace behavior continue resurfacing internationally. Because the issue now extends beyond public dislike. It touches credibility, moral authority, leadership. If the public begins associating titled royals with fear, dysfunction, or emotional instability behind closed doors, the symbolic foundation supporting monarchy weakens. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, and institutions fear gradual decline more than sudden scandal. Sudden crises can be contained. Slow reputational decay spreads everywhere. That is why commentators increasingly describe King Charles as trapped in an impossible position. On one side stands his son, on the other stands the survival of the institution he spent his entire life preparing to lead. Personal loyalty collides directly with royal duty. Every decision carries consequences. Continued silence risks further erosion. Open confrontation risks global escalation. Yet many observers believe time is narrowing the king's options, especially as public frustration grows surrounding the Sussex titles themselves. Because the longer the controversies continue, the more critics ask the same uncomfortable question: why should the monarchy continue lending royal legitimacy to figures who repeatedly generate reputational turmoil around the world? And according to several royal commentators, that question is now being discussed far more seriously inside establishment circles than the public fully realizes. Because behind palace walls, there is reportedly growing recognition that this crisis may no longer be manageable through silence alone. The institution may eventually be forced to choose: protect family or protect the crown. And if history has taught royal observers anything, it is this: the monarchy always chooses survival first. The British monarchy has survived wars, assassinations, abdications, scandals, betrayals, revolutions, and public humiliation stretching across centuries. Governments have collapsed around it. Empires have disappeared. Entire political systems have transformed beyond recognition. Yet the crown endured through all of it because the institution understands one brutal truth better than almost any power structure on earth. Survival always comes before sentiment. That principle may now define the final chapter of the conflict surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, because what began years ago, as family tension has evolved into something far larger and far more dangerous, this is no longer simply a story about hurt feelings, broken relationships, or royal disagreement. It has become a struggle between monarchy and instability, between institutional continuity and celebrity culture, between the ancient discipline of the crown and the modern machinery of personal branding. And according to many royal commentators, Buckingham Palace increasingly appears to understand that the two worlds can no longer coexist peacefully. For years, the monarchy attempted restraint. Silence became strategy. Even while Harry and Meghan publicly criticized the institution through interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and televised accusations, the palace responded with extraordinary caution. No public counterattacks, no emotional retaliation, no release of internal disputes. The royal family absorbed the damage quietly while hoping time itself might reduce tensions naturally. But time has not reduced the conflict. It has transformed it, because the public conversation surrounding Harry and Meghan is no longer centered only on race, institutional rigidity, or emotional trauma. The focus has shifted toward leadership, credibility, reputation, and accountability. Hollywood reports describing alleged fear among employees changed the atmosphere dramatically. Suddenly, the image of victimhood no longer dominated the narrative, uncontested. Questions began moving in the opposite direction. Not what the monarchy did to Meghan, but what Meghan may have done behind closed doors to others. That shift altered the balance permanently, especially because critics now argue that the monarchy protected the Sussexes more than the public ever realized. Internal palace allegations remained hidden, reports stayed sealed, staff grievances disappeared behind confidentiality and institutional restraint. Some observers believe Buckingham Palace sacrificed enormous reputational stability simply to avoid publicly destroying a member of the royal family. And now, according to growing commentary within establishment circles, patience may finally be reaching its limit. Because institutions built on symbolism cannot survive endless contamination without eventually responding, every royal title carries weight beyond celebrity status. Every public scandal attached to those titles reflects back upon the crown itself. And the monarchy cannot endlessly separate Harry and Meghan's actions from the institution while simultaneously allowing them to continue using royal identity as the foundation of their public influence. That contradiction has become increasingly difficult to sustain, especially for Prince William, because the future king reportedly views monarchy through the lens of long-term institutional survival, not emotional reconciliation. William understands something his brother appears never fully accepted. Royal life is not fundamentally about personal freedom. It is about duty to continuity. Every action either strengthens the institution or weakens it. Every public appearance either builds trust or erodes it. And according to many observers, William increasingly sees the Sussex situation as a threat requiring containment rather than repair. That is why symbolic moments now matter so much. The cropped birthday photograph, the visible distancing, the absence of public warmth, the refusal to reintegrate Harry and Meghan into royal operations. These are not emotional accidents. They are institutional signals. And perhaps the clearest signal of all is this: the monarchy appears to be preparing psychologically for permanent separation. Not dramatic exile, not explosive confrontation, but something colder: detachment. The quiet acknowledgement that Harry and Meghan now exist outside the future identity of the crown. That future identity is already taking shape around William and Catherine. Stability, discipline, family continuity, controlled public service, predictability, calm. These qualities increasingly define the image Buckingham Palace wants associated with the next era of monarchy. In contrast, the Sussex narrative has become dominated by controversy, media conflict, emotional exposure, celebrity partnerships, and reputational turbulence. The divide between those two models has become impossible to ignore. And according to some royal commentators, the palace may now believe the only path forward is complete institutional clarity. The crown cannot continue existing in a permanent state of ambiguity regarding Harry and Meghan. Eventually, lines must become visible. Boundaries must harden. The monarchy must demonstrate clearly what it represents and what it does not. That reality places King Charles in perhaps the most painful position of his reign, because behind every constitutional debate, every title discussion, every symbolic royal gesture, there remains a father watching the collapse of his relationship with his younger son. Yet monarchy has never allowed personal emotion, to override institutional responsibility for long. History repeatedly shows the same pattern. The crown absorbs heartbreak privately while projecting stability publicly. And if current trends continue, many believe the monarchy may soon move into an entirely new phase regarding the Sussexes. Not reconciliation, not war. Replacement. The gradual replacement of the Sussex era with a future centered completely around the Wales family and the next generation of monarchy. A future where Harry remains biologically connected to the institution, but no longer symbolically central to it. A future where Meghan exists entirely outside royal identity, regardless of title. Because in the end, monarchy operates according to memory and legacy. Public figures rise and fall constantly, but institutions survive by deciding who remains inside the historical narrative they choose to preserve. And right now, according to growing royal commentary, Buckingham Palace appears to be making that decision in real time. When Hollywood described Meghan as a dictator in high heels, many people dismissed it as just another brutal headline in an endless media war. But inside palace circles, some observers reportedly saw something far more significant. Confirmation. Confirmation that the fears, tensions, and warnings hidden behind palace silence for years may finally be surfacing publicly beyond the monarchy's control. And if that is true, then the real story may not be the downfall of Meghan Markle alone. It may be the moment the House of Windsor finally decided the survival of the crown required letting her go completely. Because history suggests one thing above all else about monarchy. It moves slowly, but once the palace closes a door, it rarely opens again.